Hi there, everybody. I'm Fred Thomas, and you are watching All Things Bike. And today we are speaking with Eric Zuelow, Associate Professor of European History at the University of New England. Eric.
Nice to see you.
Good to see you again, and thanks for coming down.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, well, tell us how you started off with studying the history of tourism. It's a fascinating and broad topic.
Yeah, well, and it is. It's a huge topic. The story's fairly involved.
The short version.
The short version would be that in graduate school, I went to graduate school interested in national identity and nationalism. Mm-hmm. And I started realizing through reading a variety of things and also through the work of a faculty member who I did a lot of coursework with, that tourism developers are very often involved in the business of selling an identity. When you go to Ireland, you go to experience a certain range of things. If you go to Spain, you go to experience something else. And tourism developers are very anxious to arrive at what that product is going to look like. And so my first research was all about developing what Ireland would be for tourists. What would the landscape be? What would the history be? What would the cultural events be that we were marketing? It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, no, it sounds like a brand, right? I mean, it sounds like the way these countries develop their brand, and nowadays that kind of stuff is extremely important because, you know, life is so visual and so digital and all of that. But when you were doing that research, you must have kept on seeing bikes sort of popping up here and there, and that must have been a distraction.
I mean, it's interesting, actually. The history of tourism is a relatively new topic of study.
Yeah.
And it's a relatively new topic of study, I think, because people have tended to see it as simple and, not very important. We don't necessarily look at tourists as being prestigious.
No.
The same thing's really true of bicycles. People have not, other than maybe writing a little bit about the technology itself, they haven't tended to address the implications of it. They haven't addressed the ways in which tourism and bicycles connect.
Right.
It's only fairly recently that the sport itself has developed a literature about the history of it in terms of racing.
Yeah, I mean, they're two very sort of underappreciated and sometimes sort of scorned maybe topics. Right? The loud American tourist is sort of a negative thing, and then the cyclist who's always getting in the way. But these things have become huge segments of economies and cultures too.
Well, that's right. And tourism is knocking on being the largest industry in the world. If it's not already attained that status.
It's Maine's biggest.
It's certainly right. It's one of the biggest things in terms of a place like Maine or a place like Ireland. It's right up there at the very top. And it's growing at a pretty rapid clip of, say, 3 to 5%, which it's been doing since the end of World War II.
Wow.
So that makes it interesting.
Yeah.
But it also ends up, and this is something I like about the history of bicycles as well. It ends up getting into all kinds of different areas you wouldn't expect.
Yeah.
So, for example, the story that I like to share with my students is that by the interwar period, the period between the end of World War I in 1918 and the start of World War II, there was the beginnings of what would be the big struggle of the 20th century between conflicting political ideologies. We like to think democracy was a foregone conclusion. No, it really wasn't.
Communism was an option, wasn't it?
Communism was an option, and a lot of people thought it was a good one. And fascism was an option, and a lot of people thought it was a very good one. There were fascist parties everywhere.
That's right.
And so these, and of course, democracy is in there too. So you start seeing this. Is the communist revolution in Russia going to be what's going to be next?
The next thing,
Italian fascism the future? Is National Socialism the future? Tourism became a way that these regimes could market their particular ideology. They could show why their ideology was better than others. So the Nazis had an organization called Kraft der Freude, which is actually the organization, by the way, that gives us the Volkswagen Beetle, which is kind of a fun little subplot. But they were organizing tours to particular locations to showcase aspects of the German countryside, or foreign tours to show why Germany, they'd go to places that were poor so they could show German affluence and show why it was so great.
These were global initiatives?
So, well,
and
yes,
domestic too?
Yeah, in a lot of ways. The Soviets started developing a tourism that was going to be anti-bourgeois. You had to get a prescription from your doctor to go on holiday, and your prescription might be different than your wife's prescription. So that led to some...
Couldn't have worked too well. Or
well, eventually it kind of died out.
Wow.
And cycling's kind of the same, right? I mean, you wind up finding that it has implications and it has narratives going on that you wouldn't have thought of that are pretty fascinating.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, how so? I mean, you've touched on a lot of interesting things. Talk about those narratives just for starting.
Well, so one of the first things that I encountered was a wonderful article about the Tour de France.
Right.
And which, we're filming this in July. The tour is on. There's all kinds of well, that gives us a chance to talk about something other than who's crashing who.
Yeah.
So the Tour de France started in 1903.
Right.
It was about selling a newspaper. But here's the thing. French identity is something that develops fairly slowly. There's not even a common language until toward the end of the 19th century. Public education comes along in most places fairly late.
Right.
The Tour de France winds up being how people learn to be French.
Right.
Because they didn't have a sense of the geography of their country beyond their fairly small area.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
So then the Tour de France comes along and suddenly they're watching. And so when we talk about the famous mountain passes,
it was about, hey, check out these great mountains we got.
I mean, we're interested in them from sort of a climbing perspective. 12%. Well, somebody in Paris who's probably never been to the Alps,
right,
and they hear about Alpe d'Huez or something like that, that's huge.
Yeah.
And so they got a sense of French borders and French space through the bicycle.
And other cultures too. I mean, the French culture further south, and
that's right.
And
that's right.
Different cities. Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating. So it was a way of marketing the country to itself, as well as maybe internationally too, but less so.
Yeah.
But when you were doing all this research, you were looking at the bicycle in its most original and most primitive form. Give us a sense of the technology, of how the technology of the bicycle changed while you were doing this research, and what the implication was for tourism and for the various cultures.
Right. Well, and there's of course a profound amount of change in the 19th century. The idea of a human-powered machine is first suggested in 1698.
Right.
But figuring out how to do it, that took a while. So in 1817, a guy named Karl von Drais, who was a German baron, came up with this idea for the running machine, essentially.
Yeah.
And it was two wheels with a seat strung between them and sort of rudimentary steering. I'm not sure if there were brakes.
Yeah, no brakes, yeah.
And
hang on to,
you would sit on this seat and run.
Yeah. Your steps would get sort of longer, and
the faster you went, right. So the images of these things are kind of fun with people's legs all. Fair enough.
Yeah.
You can probably go pretty fast downhill. Maybe you can average a little faster than you would walking.
Yeah.
We're talking about a machine that had wooden wheels that were
not very
heavy, didn't
comfortable.
steer very well, not very comfortable, and they didn't have rubber tires. They had metal bands, just like an old wagon.
I mean, that didn't come until the late 19th century, right?
Yeah, well, so pneumatic tires don't come along until 1889. The first time they start putting a hard rubber tire on a bike is 1870.
I get it, yeah.
So there's kind of a long period there where they're really uncomfortable. Running on a seat with two wheels, not very fast. But it takes 50 years to figure out how to put pedals on the wheel.
Right.
Then, to look at the bike here, you're sitting back here and your pedals are up there. So your legs are going forward, not very efficient.
Yeah.
You're not over the pedals when they talk about bike fit these days.
Yeah, right.
You want to be over the pedals. Well, they're way in front of you, so it's not efficient. And the front wheel is fairly small, and it's just you're pedaling the wheel, so you're pedaling like mad.
Right.
So this is 1867, but within 3 years, the novelty of that had started to wear off.
Right.
Which is what gets us to the first phase where bicycles become popular with limitations, and that's the penny farthing, the high wheeler.
This is the
kind of bike.
The bicycle that everyone recognizes because of its
Right.
huge front wheel.
Exactly.
It's like 6 feet off the ground or something.
Right, exactly. And so the idea with that was, well, it was kind of twofold.
Right.
Well, threefold, I guess. One, you are, the larger the wheel, the different gearing ratio.
Right.
So you get a bigger wheel, you can go faster.
It's like being in a 5511, like
Yes.
this thing right here.
Right. Exactly. It means you can go considerably faster. So that
Right,
makes
but you got to
for-
get going, yeah.
That means for racing, it's much better.
Okay, right.
So there's that. You're also over the wheel. So
Mm-hmm.
there's a more efficient way of pedaling.
Yeah, right.
So
the,
that's
the
good.
weight of the body, I suppose. Yeah.
The downside, well, and the other thing is
Progress.
that the other thing that you need to understand is how bad the roads were, and
Well, yeah.
that actually becomes important to the story.
Sure it does. Yeah.
The penny farthing puts you well above the dust,
Right.
well above the mud. Now, if you happen to run into anything, it wasn't very stable up there. Your center of gravity is
Yeah,
somewhere
yeah,
in the
yeah.
stratosphere. That's not very good. And
No helmets or anything like that back then. Yeah. So it's a lot. It's like falling out the window of
exactly,
of your
you're falling like 6 feet,
Yeah.
you know, which is
Cottage. Yeah, it's a
decided.
long
And,
way to go.
and again, you have hard rubber tires.
Yeah, right.
So they were called bone shakers.
Sure, yeah,
Just
that was the name.
Tore you
Yeah.
apart. And to get up there was an athletic feat.
Right.
So it's a direct drive. So the wheels the pedals are always spinning. And then they put a little step on the back, and you had to kind of run with the thing, jump up on the step, get up on the seat, have your feet, find the pedals, and go.
Wow. Yeah.
You
Yeah,
had to
I
be
mean,
an
yeah, I mean-
athlete just to get up
Yeah, I
there.
mean, yeah, exactly. If you think a start at a time trial is challenging, I mean, this is a whole nother level.
Right. Well, I mean, these did actually inaugurate the start of time trialing. It really took off in Britain, and because of the larger wheel, because you could actually go fast, this is the
right.
point where
Yeah.
you get the John O'Groats Land End time trial, and you know,
Right.
and it speaks also to the athleticism involved in the fact that you really did have to be
Right.
an athlete. This is
Right.
kind of limited to wealthy men who
Yeah.
can afford to buy the thing and who are young and fit.
So did that the bicycle? I mean, when it was the high wheeler, and then as it became the safety bicycle, which is the one with two more as that technology got to that point, did it suddenly make it socially acceptable to be an athlete and to be outdoors and to embrace the sort of the rural life?
Yeah. Well, so the first thing is you mentioned the safety bicycle. So the first
Right.
thing they have to do is figure out a way to get off of the high wheeler.
Right.
They have to have a direct drive chain, something that's going to get you a decent gearing
Right.
ratio.
Right.
And something that's going to be easier to handle, something
Right.
that's going to be more comfortable. And that happens over the course of the 1880s. 1883 or so, no, 1887, you get the first chain drive bicycle.
Right.
They come up with pneumatic tires in 1889,
Right, so it was sort of in that
and then the price came down.
Right,
And
okay.
when the price came down, that's when
I see.
suddenly the masses can afford to buy one of these things. The price
Right.
goes from, in French francs, so the earlier had been 500 francs, which was 3 months of a teacher's salary.
Right. I mean, that's over $10,000. I think I tried it on the
Oh, did you?
on the deflator, yeah, and it's over $10,000 U.S. dollars. But anyway, and then it got all the way down to what, 50 francs?
50 francs. So this is something that pretty much anybody can afford.
Yeah.
Then now you can get out into the countryside.
Right.
There is a kind of a side note that I always find really interesting. So today, I always think that prestige comes from being aero on the bike and having a good bike fit, you know, being low and fast. Well,
Not always, but go on.
there was a sense because bicycles had been something that the wealthy rode. And
Right.
Of course, they rode horses too.
That's right.
You wanted to sit as upright as possible.
Oh,
So racers were working class people. If you were getting aero, that was a sign of being working class.
Yeah.
So just how you sit on the bicycle winds up having a class dimension to it.
Exactly, social ramifications. But then, I mean, what's fascinating is that suddenly everybody can afford a bike, and suddenly everybody likes the idea of like being able to get out of their own whatever street, right? And mobility is a lot easier. And then the shock and horror of suddenly meeting, you're an aristocrat when you're out riding in the countryside, and you're the laborer, or maybe you even work for the guy. Who knows? That had a tremendous social impact too. I mean, weren't there? I mean, some people were afraid of it, and some people wanted to shut it down, right?
Oh yeah, even going back to the Draisine days, there's a lot of concern. The real anxiety for elites, and this even goes back to the advent of railways, is what happens when workers can move around.
Right, job mobility.
Job mobility,
Right.
precisely.
Yeah.
What happens when they have the power to go different places?
Right.
When railways first developed, it didn't last very long, but initially they tried to limit who could ride the trains. They, for fiscal reasons, moved beyond that within a few years, but very quickly they tried to do this. Some governments, the Austrian government, for example, was terrified of having trains just because they were afraid of anybody moving around other than the elites. Well, with bicycles, there's that same kind of anxiety, because now it's not even that you're limited to a rail line.
Yeah, you can
go anywhere.
Go anywhere, yeah. So they wouldn't pave the roads, or maybe they wouldn't.
Well, no. So that's interesting.
Or service the roads, or
that's
whatever.
interesting. Well, so there's a. It's complicated. There's a bunch of different stuff going on. Who has municipal control? Who's going to take care of roadways? Certainly in Britain, it had been parish councils that were responsible for roadways until fairly late, which meant that the roads tended to be pretty bad.
Right.
So there's a question of what the government should be doing, or what local providers should be doing. But when bicycles come in, because of all of those things we talked about, they were initially very expensive. So the people who were involved in trying to improve the roads were in fact the ones who had some power.
Oh, right, yeah. They were like, yeah, why don't we broaden this a little bit?
Right. Well, the League of American Wheelmen, for example, in the United States, was founded in 1880. So 1880. So this is before the cycle craze, before all these people are out, and their goal is to improve roadways for bicycles. We're still 9 years out at that point from pneumatic tires, so having better roads was kind of important.
Was essential, yeah. Well, what about the impact on the lives of women? There was a material and significant impact.
If you're got a high wheeler, getting up there in 19th century women's clothing, not very easy. Whereas with the safety bicycle, that became something that was much easier.
Right.
19th century was what historians refer to as a period of separate spheres, women in the home and outside.
Right.
Bicycles, once they became affordable, started to erode that, and pretty quickly.
Right.
So women were able to form cycling clubs themselves. They were able to go out with other women.
Right.
Just as there were working class cycling clubs, there were women's cycling clubs. And they were proliferating in number on both sides of the Atlantic.
Yeah.
It gave women that freedom that there'd been the anxiety about workers having. Right. Which meant that it's probably not surprising that bicycles become one of the symbols of the suffrage movement. Right. Because women can get out there and move. They end up having this really quite extraordinary political meaning, which you might not have expected.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating, and see you later, honey. I'm going for a bike ride, and there was tons of pushback too.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, when going back to the Tour de France example, so watching the Tour de France, people are learning about France by following this race. Well, now that they can get out of their towns, they start learning about the countryside around them within potentially
or
quite
other
a large distance.
Yeah.
So developing a sense of identity and a sense of place and a sense of national identity became something that was very possible in a way that hadn't been true before for all social classes and genders.
Yeah, and well, talk about the impact on racing. I guess in the United States, I mean, the bicycles were more affordable, so women are able to get out and ride, and then the men, they go out and ride, and then of course they do what they do, which is they start racing against each other, and before you know it, you've got a huge racing scene in the U.S. And
well, this is something that
totally forgotten, right?
It's totally forgotten.
Eclipsed by
essentially
basketball, football.
Every city
Right.
had a velodrome.
I know.
A place like Springfield, Massachusetts had, and this is true of pretty much any town, would have an entire street of bike shops.
What? Now, yeah, maybe they got 5 or 6 now. I don't know.
Across a town, maybe if it's a larger
Well, they used to
town.
make them there too.
They
I
would
bet.
make them there,
Yeah,
sure.
right.
There were local manufacturers.
Right.
There was a lot of competition, of course, so the manufacturers would hire people to do stunts out in front of the shops. A lot of the
Trick
best
bikes,
racers were doing tricks.
Yeah, yeah.
And then they would sponsor races.
Right.
And if you could win a race on this bike rather than that bike, then that was great marketing, just as
Sure.
it is today with the Tour de France and Pinarello versus
Exactly.
whoever
Yeah,
it
yeah, yeah.
happens to be.
Some things never change, I guess.
Exactly, exactly. And these people became heroes.
Yeah.
They became watching Madison Square Gardens. Madison Square Gardens did not start as a music venue or a basketball venue. It started
Right.
as a velodrome.
Had nothing to do with gardens either.
No, it was a velodrome, and people would go out there and watch races that went on for 6 days.
Right.
And they would get excited about land speed records and excited about this and that.
And they were raucous parties too. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
and
Great
cloud-filled rooms and cigar chomping spectators and beer all around.
Yeah.
And it is based on the Madison race, which is a 6-day event, and they call it the Madison for some reason.
So Madison Racing gets its name from Madison Square Gardens. And for people who aren't familiar with track cycling, it's a 2-person event,
Okay.
2-man team. One person's racing at any one moment, and then you literally throw your teammate in. So the rider who's going to be thrown in puts their hand behind their back.
Right.
The other rider who's moving fast comes in, reaches out, grabs that hand, slings them in. Momentum changes. One rider slows down, goes in, rests. The other rider races.
Wow.
It's a hoot.
Yeah.
It's a hoot.
Well, tell us about your book. You have written a book, History of Modern Tourism, and I know there's a lot in there. But what inspired you, first of all, and then what are some key things?
I mean, what inspired me, I think, is the reality that there are so many of these stories that people don't know. Mm-hmm. There are so many ways that tourism ends up connecting to different aspects of life, as we've been talking about with bicycles and so on. And you don't necessarily think about these things. Right? There's the technology thing, of course. Yeah. There's social class issues. There's gender issues. There's race issues. There's all kinds of different things. And it's just really an exciting story. Yeah, no one had written a book like that.
There you go.
So it was time.
Yeah, no, it's highly relevant, because I mean now I find I can't go on a holiday without bringing my bike. Okay, I might be an exception, but there is, you see a lot more of your neighborhood on a bike, and the vacations that I've taken since I've been riding more, I see more of the country or the state in 2 weeks of riding my bike around. Or whatever it is, 1 week of riding around on my bike, than I would see 2 weeks in a van or a bus. And now there's no other way. I just can't go to a beach and hang out anymore. I mean, maybe after a ride, but.
Right. One of the things that tourism scholars get really interested in is optics, how things look.
Yeah.
When automobiles come in, the way in which people view landscape changes because it's framed by a window.
Right, right.
With a bicycle, it's really similar. You're seeing things at a particular speed that's faster than walking or running,
Yep.
And a lot slower than a car.
Yeah.
So you get big panoramas, and you get them at a particular speed.
And you get access, and so you
get access to any place.
You stop, and the family pulls up next to you, and there are 5 kids on a motorbike, and the pet dog is on the handlebars, and they say hi, and they smile, and they laugh. That you never get if you're in a bus or a van. So what is the future of tourism? If the history has been what we've seen, what could the future of tourism be?
Well, so I'm under a professional obligation as a historian to preface this by saying that the great 20th century historian A.J.P. Taylor said once, reportedly, to a journalist, "My boy, historians predict the past only badly. We have no business predicting the future." Now, having said that,
But, yes.
having said that, I think the future for bicycle touring is really pretty bright. First of all, tourism itself is growing at 3 to 5% a year.
Right, so that's going to keep on happening.
And that, according to the UN World Tourism Organization, that's supposed to continue until 2030 or something.
Right, until we've all been everywhere.
Right, until everybody just gets tired and stays home.
I've been to that.
So that's really promising. The discussion of green energy and concern over climate change and things like that, I think we're seeing an uptick in bicycle commuting. And I think a large part of that has to do with concern about the environment. Bicycle technology is probably playing a role as well.
Sure, it's easier to bring your bike nowadays, or your bike can come apart more readily, and they're great cases, and airlines are a little more flexible.
But there's also this kind of diversification of the market and the rise of technologies that are more flexible. So cyclocross, which I imagine you've talked about on the show before, has led to the rise of the gravel grinder. One of the attractions of cycling as a touring thing was adventure and getting out there and kind of roughing it. And so the rise of gravel riding is a chance to do that in a new way.
Absolutely.
And that's exciting. So cycling is developing all of these kind of niche areas. The equipment works better. It's easier to adjust and work on.
And there's still it still has the leisure traveler aspect to it, where people sign up for a fully appointed ride through a part of France or Italy or the U.S. and everything is taken care of, and it's not roughing it. But you're still getting that full-on experience of riding your bike down a lane or a road or something that you would never experience if you were in the car.
Since the 1960s, 1970s, the kind of trend in tourism has been towards niche tourism, towards towards things that are more individualized to consumers.
I can believe that for sure.
And so bicycle touring is doing that too. So now you can go on your Tour de France tour and you can follow the Tour, follow the Giro, the Vuelta. You can take culinary tours where you ride your bike during the day and eat high-fat food at night. You can do winery tours and the Italian, Spanish, and French
or you can
wine
do that right here in Maine with summer feet cycling tours. I mean, these guys run tours all over the mid-coast and all the way up in Acadia and all the way up to Newfoundland, and people sign up and they go. And
everybody I know who's done one of those things just loves it. And they make friends. They see stuff. They feel like they're doing things. They have a license to really just live.
All this talk, now I want to go on vacation. What's your next vacation? Last question.
I am heading out west to see my parents. I do this every summer. I bring my bike.
And you bring your bike.
And the hills are a lot bigger out there, so I can spend time doing 6,000 or 7,000 foot climbing days.
Oh man, I'm jealous.
It's a lot of fun.
Hey Eric, that's great. Thanks so much for coming down and telling us about
it. It's been
this.
a pleasure.
Anytime. All right, everybody. That was Eric Zuelow, Associate Professor of European History at the University of New England. Now, you can find out more about his book on his website, ericzuelow.com. That's all we've got time for right now. Thanks so much for watching, and we will see you again soon.
All Things Bike with Fred Thomas is brought to you by Zentis, performance carbon wheels handmade in Austria for road and off-road riding. Zentis, next generation wheels. And Frame and Wheel eBay bike selling services. Time, space, cash. Pick 3. And AD Bikes, the modern face of Austro-Daimler cycling and the bike company of the future.